our little museum hasn't been open very long, but this is a good response to what we're doing here, I think. So this is our second time. Some of you here, I think the first time we had a month ago when we had the two helicopter pilots speak. One of them's here, Mike Boren, I think. So there it is back there. And please feel free to look at all our displays, walk around here. This is still a work in progress. We're still not done with this room yet. And we almost got the Civil War exhibit done, and we're going to start working more on this Vietnam era bunker. So, but we opened from mid-April and through Veterans Day, and but we've had a lot of people come through here since Veterans Day. So if they catch me around here, we give them a tour. So if you see my car out there, come on in. We're going to have a grand opening April 22nd of this year, and we're going to have some, hopefully some politicians come here and speak, bring boots. But we can talk about how our funding and how we came about first. I get the job of doing the infomercial here, so bear with me. We're a 501c3. We're attached to the Historical Society next door. They own the building. Then we do our own fundraising and do our own support for this building. But we are attached to their 501c3, so we're a subchapter or an extension of that. We have no paid employees. We're all 100% volunteers. And we'll talk about that in just a minute here. We do not charge a fee to see our museum. And we're going to keep it that way as long as I can run this place. We're funded by donations at the door, other private donations, and grants. We just got a grant to purchase a building behind us. The reason we got this grant was because people sign in and they know how many people come through our museum. So that's why we asked you to sign in. It's all part of that payment in kind that the state talks about all the time. It used to be Alternative Learning School, if you know what that is. It's a very nice building. It's about twice as big as this. So we're going to work on that later this year. But it's a very nice building. We spent a year getting this building up to where it is. But that was pretty well ready to go. But the money for that, the grant came from the hotel motel tax fund in this county. So that's why they wanted something to do with developing tourism in the county, which we had about, I don't know how many people, at least 100 or so came over about 200 miles that visited this museum, and that's kind of why we got the grant money. It allowed us to bid on the building back there, and we were a successful bidder, and we got the building. I mentioned we were 100% volunteers. I'm going to mention a few of our volunteers here. Over here on the right is Mr. Gene Turnbull. He's a very dedicated volunteer here. And maybe you didn't know this, but Gene helped develop the Polaris missile program. Missiles that were shot from submarines. Gentleman right over here. I think that's fantastic. Pat Brown, where are you, Pat? There he is, back. Pat was one of the first units to go to Vietnam in 1962. That's why everybody else had to go, I think. Jeff Snyder over here standing. Jeff was a combat engineer in Vietnam, and over here in one of these displays he has some of his pictures of the diorama on the wall there that Jeff made. Jeff's good at making models and dioramas, and we really appreciate that. Bill Weinhardt's not here, but he's a volunteer. He was on Special Landing Force Alpha. He was communications in Vietnam. Zach Crooker, I don't think Zach made it tonight, but he was in Germany right between Korea and Vietnam. He comes over and gives us a lot of good advice. Denny Dodd, Denny's standing over here. You probably all know Denny. He's a combat medic, South Vietnam, about 1968, right? And me, I was in infantry in 1969 near Saigon in Vietnam, near the rice paddies and pineapple patches. Karen, my wife, retired special ed teacher. She's also our treasurer for the museum and multitask volunteer. So we sweep the floor, clean the, But we're very fortunate to have her. Her father fought on Omaha Beach in World War II. Chandra Foster. Chandra's running there she is over here. Chandra is a junior high school teacher, a history teacher, and she's our curator of the museums. All these nice, beautiful displays, Chandra helped put them together, and it's her ideas on how everything's displayed. And that's what makes this museum what it is. Chandra's parents are both retired Air Force people, both of them. Chandra, I want you to talk just a couple words about our Wall of Honor program here on the wall.
Our Wall of Honor are for those veterans who at some point in their life lived in Pike County. So whether they were a lifelong resident or went to school here when they were young or came here and retired, for $35, if you have either yourself or someone, a loved one, that you would like to add to the Wall of Honor, we put their name, service dates, and rank. It's a little fundraiser for us. They're fatheads, so they are removable, like on our decals, because as our museum grows, we'll be changing exhibits, and we can just peel those off and put them in a new location, so they'll kind of be with our museum, hopefully, as long as we're around. We've got paperwork up here by the sign-in book, so if that's something that you're interested. We just need a photo. An original or a copy would be the best. And I have Lord and I have cards up here, so if you need to contact us, call us, because we can pop in. I had someone bring one in today, which took it the back, took a photo, and painted it right back to us. So it's not something that we have to keep long term, and it will be something that you get back. So.
Okay, thank you. Okay, without further ado, Denny, you want to introduce our guest speaker tonight? And I think you all really enjoyed it.
Sure. Our speakers, we are going to try to have this evening at the museum on a once a month basis. It's turned out these first two are on Tuesday evenings. The next one is going to be on a Tuesday evening, but it'll be the 14th of March. And our speaker that night will be Craig Rush, who is a retired lieutenant colonel and a helicopter pilot. So if you mark your calendars for, I think it'll be 5 weeks from today. It'll be Tuesday, March 14th. Now this evening, we have a speaker that is a lifelong resident of Pike County, except for the 37 years that he spent in the Air Force. So, yeah, a lifelong resident of Pike County, minus 37 years of career Air Force. He entered the Air Force in '72 as an enlisted man and was a Russian linguist. So everything that the Russians were broadcasting, he was listening to. He and his team were listening to. Then he went to OCS and became an officer in communications. So as a communications officer, he still had pretty good feel on the Cold War. So the Cold War is his part of our defense mechanism and his time period. So I'd like to introduce Bill Durall.
Well, thank you, Denny. Before I start, I want to give a lot of thanks to Lloyd and all the folks that brought this museum from an idea to fruition. I think it's a great resource for Pike County. I thank Denny for starting these evenings at the museum because I think it makes it more than just a place to come and look at stuff. This is an opportunity for us to learn a little bit about perhaps some living history. Now, on the other hand, I'm not sure I appreciate the fact that maybe I might be part of the living history, but that's okay. Anyway, as Denny mentioned, a lot of my career, my Air Force career, was spent in the Cold War, and so that's going to be the focus of my remarks this evening. And Peggy has told me many times, be sure to use notes, because if you don't use notes, you just wander. So I've got my notes, and so we'll talk a little bit about the Cold War and kind of where my career in the Air Force intersected with that. First, let me add just a little bit to what Denny said. I did go into the Air Force. I enlisted in the Air Force in 1972, and I retired from the Air Force in 2009, October 72 to October 2009, so 37 years and about 10 days. During that time, Peggy and I were married. We got married a year before I went into the Air Force. We moved 21 times in that 37 years. We spent 2 tours in Germany, 1 tour in England. We spent a year up in Canada when I was up there on a fellowship, and we did 2 years in Korea. And then we were in several assignments across the United States. So about half of that time we spent on the front lines of the Cold War, one place or another. And so let me talk about that just a little bit. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Cold War, because I think it's good to know, or to have a little reminder about how the Cold War actually started, because when I close my remarks, we'll see that, you know, what comes around goes around with regard to history and international politics. So most experts agree that the Cold War ran from the period of 1948 to 1991. And in reality, Mike and historians here may have some more details on this, but in reality, the Cold War started as fallout from World War II. If you remember, the United States, America, Great Britain, France, and Russia, or the Soviet Union, were allies in World War II against Germany and Italy and Japan. And at the end of World War II, the Western Allies had advanced into Germany. The Soviet Union troops had advanced from the east into Germany, and the Germans surrendered. So after that, Truman and Churchill and Stalin and I think maybe de Gaulle, I'm not sure if he was the president of France at that time, but anyway, they met to talk about how to handle the end of the war. The Western Allies wanted to pursue a policy of rollback, to get combatant troops back out of Germany and the other invaded nations, and have a peace based on law and morality. Stalin, who was the Soviet leader at that time, could not understand it. It just didn't make sense to him. To him, the Soviets had advanced through Poland and Czechoslovakia into Germany. That ought to be their territory as a spoil of war. So, that stalemated, and between 1947 and 1948, Harry Truman came up with what was the Truman Doctrine, which was a doctrine of containment between the West, which were countries dedicated to democracy and free elections, and the East, which was the Soviet Union and its associated republics, who were communist socialist nations. And so eventually that policy of containment morphed into the domino theory, and it became the Cold War. And some of the significant events with the Cold War, we had the Berlin blockade in 1948, 1949, and the Berlin airlift. We had Sputnik in 1957 with Yuri Gagarin in 1961. It sort of started the space race. Gary Francis Powers U-2 got shot down over Russia in 1960. Had the Cuban Missile Crisis in '62. Many of you, I'm sure, remember that. The Berlin Wall went up in 1961. Then Neil Armstrong became the first man to walk on the moon in 1969, which was sort of the culmination of the U.S. victory to the space race. The other major aspect of the Cold War was the nuclear race. And we had, obviously, we built our nuclear triad with the submarine leg, the bomber leg, and the intercontinental ballistic missile leg. Russians had similar weapons, and so it began. Now, I started in 1972. I went to Knox. After I graduated from Pittsfield High School, I had a military from the draft. In 1969, there was the first draft lottery.
Number 46.
Okay, 27. Okay. So I still had my deferment, but I kept that number, and I didn't think too much about the draft because I was in school. In 1972, when I graduated, I started to think about the draft because in 1972 was actually the last year that they drafted people. December of 72 was the last person that they drafted for entry into the military by, I think, July of 73. So I thought about my options, and I thought, well, perhaps I want to take some control of this situation, and so I enlisted in the Air Force in order to get some technical training and technical education to go along with my Knox liberal arts degree. And so in October 72, I went down to basic training in electronics. While I was at basic, somebody sent me off to take this language aptitude battery of tests. I did well on that, and the next thing I knew, I wasn't going to be an electronics technician, I was going to be a linguist. And I had three choices, or three languages from which to make a choice. It was Vietnamese, Mandarin Chinese, or Russian. And I put Russian down as my first choice, and that's what I got. And so at the end of basic training, off we went to Monterey, California, the Defense Language Institute West Coast branch. While we were out there, I took both basic and intermediate Russian. Now you can look at them, I've got a few of my books that were from the Russian program. We had class 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. Basic Russian was 47 weeks long, so almost a year. And then intermediate Russian was another 27 weeks. And so it was very intense. We learned about 20 or 30 new vocabulary words every day. We got a new grammar lesson every day. We had transcription practice. And it was interesting, when we first got out there, the first thing we learned was about the Cyrillic alphabet. And we were practicing that every day. And so you'd go off to write a check or write something in English, and I'd look at it after I got done. It was about half American letters and half Cyrillic letters. They're very confusing. Anyway, when we got done there, we went down to Goodfellow Air Force Base for some technical training. And by that time, all of us that had been in school had time for our top secret special compartmented intelligence clearances to get processed and done. That was an impediment for some folks. Couldn't get clearance. But we got our clearances, and then we headed off to Berlin. And if you'll remember, well, okay, I've got a note here. It says, speak Russian here. Somebody said the other day, I've never heard anybody speak Russian. Do you still remember some? And да, теперь я говорю только немного по-русски. Я учил русский язык теперь больше, чем 40 лет тому назад, и я все не помню. And what I said was, I studied Russian over 40 years ago, and I still speak just a little bit, but I've forgotten a lot. So, anyway, if you'll remember, in those early 70s, the Cold War had morphed into a fairly stable, static position. And the U.S. military had a forward-based strategy for deployment. We don't have that so much now. We've pulled back a lot of our troops from foreign locations. But then we had the Army and the Air Force, the Benelux and Germany, Italy, and other countries. So when I got my assignment to Berlin, Peggy went along with me for an accompanied 3-year tour. So we were in Berlin from 74 to 77. And I think it's interesting to note that one of the first negotiated areas of the Cold War was to divide Germany into 4 sectors. And some of you in the back can't see this too well, but this part out here, this is a map of Germany. This was West Germany. It was divided into a French sector, a British sector, and an American sector. And here is Berlin, right over here, deep inside East Germany. Berlin was divided into 4 sectors as well. A French sector, a British sector, an American sector, and a Soviet sector. And so when we went to Berlin, after studying Russians, we were here deep inside, behind the Iron Curtain and deep inside the enemy's territory, if you will. Our job there, we had at the time probably 1,000 military intel folks of various kinds. And our job, as Denny suggested, was to listen to and track what the Russian troops, Soviet troops, the East German troops, and to a lesser extent the Polish and the Czech troops were doing. We looked at their tactics, their weapon systems, we followed their exercises, we looked for new weapon systems coming into the area and so forth. And there was also, in addition to those of us in Berlin, there was, here at Potsdam, there was a U.S. military liaison mission there in Potsdam, and they were an adjunct to us. Our role was what's called SIGINT, or Signals Intelligence. Modern militaries use lots of equipment that have some sort of broadcast signature. Okay? I was in the comment business, communications intelligence. How many of you use telephone? Okay? How many of you send text messages? Okay? Or any number of different ways that you can communicate. Okay? That phone sends out a signal. It can be intercepted. And if you can intercept it, then you can listen to it if you've got the right equipment. So that's what we did. We tracked radio and telecommunications systems. That was the comment part. And then we had other folks that were ELINT, electronic intelligence, and they analyzed the signals that were non-communication signals that came off of different equipment. Air defense missile systems, their surveillance, and then their tracking radar signals. Signals that came off of aircraft for various kinds. And they would track those and correlate those to specific types of weapon systems so that we knew what the bad guys were doing and where they were doing it. The folks at the military liaison mission were more in the human intelligence and the photo intelligence business. And they'd go out into East Germany and they'd take pictures, and if they had defectors and folks, they'd debrief them and so forth. So every once in a while they'd come up to our ops facilities and we'd talk to them and see what they knew, and they'd talk to us and see what we thought we knew, and it worked out pretty well. One other thing that I should probably mention is that in Berlin, while we were there, it was the early stages of accelerated technological advances. When I first got to Berlin, our collection operators had reel-to-reel tape decks with specific receivers that they used to tune into different frequencies. We'd record stuff on a reel-to-reel tape. When those tapes got full, they'd go down to the transcribers and put them up on their reel-to-reel tape decks. They'd listen to them, they'd transcribe the material. Then they'd come to reporters. Reporters would take that 6-ply paper that they did their transcripts on, manual mil-spec typewriters, and then we would glean information from those transcripts, and then we'd report it through teletype machines. We went from that kind of a situation to a situation where we had a computer-assisted system with shared tape decks, banks of tape decks, shared receivers, and everything was pretty much paperless. The operators would listen. They didn't know which receiver they were on. They'd listen. They'd target a frequency. It'd go to a recorder someplace else. The transcribers then at some point that would show up on their queue, and they transcribe it. It'd come to us in the reporting queue, and then that was the way that we did business. And we did that at Berlin, and we had a sister site out in Augsburg, Germany, had a similar upgrade at the time. As I pointed out, West Berlin was a very unique ground site, but it certainly wasn't the only ground site that we had in Air Force Security Service. We used to tell, I was stationed at the 6912th Security Squadron there in Berlin. People used to think we were security police people because we were the security squad. We were on the other side of the security. So we had ground stations in other places as well. In England, others out in West Germany, in Italy, down in Greece and Turkey, and on around in Japan, up in Alaska, out into the Philippines. Some of those were HF, high frequency, long distance high frequency sites that had have any of you heard of the elephant cage antennas? They were HF antennas that were arrayed in a circle. They were 96, 120-foot antenna towers that were all hooked in together. And the folks there kept track of Russian HF networks. So anyway, we had a lot of folks around the Soviet Union keeping track of what they were doing. But even with that, as you can see, the Soviet Union was a big area. And so couldn't track all of them. So we had an airborne program. And in 1977, Peggy and I were talking about what we were going to do for our next assignment. And we figured the closest that we could get, as a Russian linguist, the closest we could get to here was to go to Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska. So I got into the airborne program. And let me take this map down for a while. With that, I moved into being an enlisted crew member on the RC-135 aircraft. So, our mission was much the same that we had in Berlin. Very different from the other ground sites. And you can see that the RC-135 is essentially an airborne electronic vacuum cleaner. Okay? You've got an elongated nose on this Boeing 707 airframe. Got an elongated nose. It's got fat cheeks. You got antennas under here. That black area there is an antenna. We had all kinds of equipment on there that allowed us to pick up different kinds of signals. Again, comment and ELINT both. And so we flew, depending on where we were flying from, we flew a lot of different places. The RC-135s are still active today. They're flying in places much different from where we flew during the Cold War. So we were stationed there in Omaha, and in fact, we flew operational missions out of Omaha because, remember the Cuban Missile Crisis in '62? You got to keep track of those nasty people down there. So, what language do you suppose hopped on board the aircraft for those missions? Spanish. That's right. I don't want to be politically incorrect. We used to call those Wiener missions. And so we had a few of us Russian linguists that would fly those, but mostly it was Spanish linguists. And then from Omaha, that was the headquarters for the RC-135 folks. There we would deploy. In our case, we deployed to Mildenhall, England, or we deploy up to Fairbanks, Alaska, Eielson Air Force Base. And then from Mildenhall, eventually we moved to Mildenhall, and from there we would fly in places you couldn't get to in the Soviet Union on the ground. So we'd go up in here, fly around, we'd go up in here and fly around, and from Alaska we would go over in here and fly around, we'd come down in here and fly around. So you never knew what you were going to get when you went on a flight. But for the entire time we were in Mildenhall from 79 to 82, for the entire time we were over there, we were flying contingency missions because the Russians, Soviet forces, were doing weird stuff here along the Polish border and in other places. So we were keeping pretty close track of what they were doing. It was interesting. Our missions ran anywhere from 12 hours to 18 hours, wheels up to wheels down. We always had at least one refueling, sometimes 2 or 3 refuelings, not for us to give gas, but for us to take gas. The RC is one of the tanker-based aircraft that can't refuel others. There's so much equipment on board, can't get enough gas on there to refuel somebody else. So almost always, once it takes off, you got to take gas in order to have your mission go. We tell people, if people would say, oh, ooh, you're on fly air crew. Well, yeah. Well, where do you go? Well, we take off from here and we come back. Well, you don't land somewhere? Nope. Now, why didn't we land anywhere else? Because the RC is a national level asset, and it requires a ton of security if it goes someplace besides its home station. So we took off, and then we went to great pains to land back at Mildenhall. And I can remember one flight in particular. My spot on the aircraft happened to be right where you can see out the window of the side door. And we orbited Mildenhall coming back home because they had bad crosswinds. We didn't want to go down to Torrejon, Spain, which was our alternate. And so we circled, and finally the weather guy said, okay, you're cleared. And we went down there, and I swear we didn't miss the ground but about 6 inches on the wingtip there when we went down. But it was terrible for the folks at other places. We had to land. It was a huge impact on their security force people to guard that airplane because it was 24/7 guards. You had to set up a perimeter, and it was bad news for them. Okay, so while I was still in that airborne program, we went through a similar upgrade as we did in Berlin. We went from individual receiver positions with reel-to-reel tape decks. We used water-soluble paper to take our notes so that if we crashed, if we got shot down, then that water-soluble paper would dissolve. But we went from that to another computer-assisted automated system where we had shared receivers, shared tape decks, and we'd go fly our mission. And then when we came back and landed, our maintenance folks would take those tapes out, and then they'd go load them into an identical system on the ground where we could process all of this stuff that we collected on the mission. So that was our airborne activity. In 1982, I got picked up to go to officer training school. We went from Mildenhall, I went down to officer training, then I went to basic comm officer training, and then we still stayed on the front lines of the Cold War because after that we went off to Grand Forks Air Force Base, North Dakota. And there I was part of the communications squadron, and we were responsible for all of the radio and other communications systems that supported a B-52 bomber wing and a Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missile wing. And you can come up and look at this later. This is a small a piece of one of the small cables that supported the Minuteman III missiles. It's called Hicks, Hardened Intersight Cable System. And you'll see when we come up here, it has got all kinds of layers to protect those copper wires from HEMP, high altitude electromagnetic pulse. These were buried about 6 feet in the ground. The big cables were big.